Hey everyone, how are you doing today? This is Mr. Hefner, again, as if you didn't know it by now. And today we are going to take a look at another modernist poet. His name is William Carlos Williams. He's a little bit unusual in that he worked his career as a doctor, which is why I'm standing outside a hospital today. He worked his career as a doctor, and yet his poetry had enough respect that he was able to hang out with the most famous and most talented poets and writers of his time. So today we're going to take a look at two of his poems. They're deceptively simple, but we'll read them together and then we'll go through the check for understanding questions. So let's get started. Now, the two poems we're going to take a look at, the first one is called "This Is Just to Say." And the other one is an interesting poem called "The Red Wheelbarrow." And people sit around and debate and debate and debate what the meaning behind this poem could be. If you've ever seen, I think it was on Netflix, there was a series called Mr. Robot about, it was Rami Malek, and he played a kind of a computer hacker who brought down the world's entire monetary system in order to even things out and make things better. But there was a radical group, and they kept reciting the poem, "The Red Wheelbarrow." And in fact, one of the locations in the story was, I think they had ribs. It was like a little fast food rib place, but it was called the Red Wheelbarrow. And a lot of the show had to do with labor and things like that. So we'll talk about it when we take a look at the poem. But there's William Carlos Williams there in the lower left part of your screen. Cool guys wear bow ties, right? So he's got the good look going on there. Our less than essential question for today is going to be, what types of imagery does Williams use in his poetry? And imagery is one of his things. He used to say, I'm paraphrasing here, but he used to say something like, there are no ideas except in things. And so that if you wanted to express an idea that somebody else could really connect to, you had to be able to do that first through the physical aspects of the world that we all encounter. So that means that his poetry has a lot of symbolism in it. And so if you like that sort of thing, you're going to like William Carlos Williams. There he is. Oh, he took off the bow tie and put on a regular tie for that one. Born in 1883, lives until 1963. So I was actually 1 year old when William Carlos Williams passes away. And that's a big difference from when we started this whole unit doing writers who were alive back in the 1600s. We now, at least I have a connection to some of these writers in the time that I lived. He was born in Rutherford, New Jersey, and in fact, he lived out his life in Rutherford, New Jersey. He had a house like any other house, but poets and writers would come see him. They'd come visit. Evidently, there was a lot of action going on. He did his medical practice, and then he would take his prescription pad and flip it over and use the blank side. And as ideas would come to him, he would sketch out poetry. His wife would be in the other room hearing him tapping out poetry when he should have been doing other things. So he was definitely a full-time physician, but also a full-time poet. The two jobs kind of overlapped with one another. Not only was he a physician, but he was also a dentist. And I mentioned Ezra Pound was an influence. So Ezra Pound was kind of like probably the most influential modernist poet in this time period. And William Carlos Williams was highly influenced. And so it's not that his poetry is the same or the same style, but he was inspired by the whole modernist idea and taking poetry in a new direction. In fact, we're going to look at T.S. Eliot in this course, one of the most important poets of the modernist period. But William Carlos Williams used to criticize T.S. Eliot quite a bit because Williams believed that poetry was now moving into a kind of a people's language, much more simple, where imagery would communicate, and you should cut away, kind of like Hemingway, you should cut away all that floweriness of language and go with what's essential. And Williams does that, but he thought that T.S. Eliot was making his verbiage too difficult, making his language too flowery, and that he was kind of pushing poetry backwards instead of forwards. I can imagine two poets sitting around and arguing about the right way to do poetry. His medical practice was largely in pediatrics, and it was 1912 for that. And then here's one of the things that caused him a little bit of a problem at different times as far as being popular was he was a political, he was on the left. So he believed in socialism. He believed that if we were pure capitalism in this country, there would be always those people who make a lot of money and they're able to then kind of take advantage of the people who don't have money. And he was a physician and he wanted to do well by people, but he was fascinated by some of the concepts of Karl Marx. And when we read the Red Wheelbarrow, some people have even said that the color red was intentionally chosen sort of to represent the Red Scare and the communist ideas that came out of that. He had health issues later in life, and eventually he retired from his practice and devoted his time fully to writing poetry. I guess that would happen to everyone. And in the, close to the last year of his life, maybe it was the last year of his life, he did receive the Pulitzer Prize in poetry for that year. So I think we've talked about it before. The Pulitzer Prize is a national award, and it's given each year to several different categories. So you could win the Pulitzer Prize for a novel. You could win the Pulitzer Prize for the best news story. He won it for poetry. I think we've talked about some of this as we go on. I have some things highlighted in yellow already. So one of the things he wanted to do, you see that first highlighted phrase, American idiom. He wanted to, in his poetry, capture the way Americans really do speak. I mentioned a moment ago, he kind of argued with T.S. Eliot, who was trying to make language flowery and beautiful. And William Carlos Williams wanted to have poetry that the people could really connect with. Images are a big part of what his poetry is going to be. And the images are just going to pop out at you as we take a look at these here. He used free verse. I don't know of any poems where he rhymed or had a really strong metrical structure to his poems. Imagery is all about his. And so if you look, other things that I have here, he developed variable feet. So to me, variable feet means free verse. It means you're not following any rules. He saw that he had this rhythm in there, but he didn't keep it the same throughout the poem. So maybe that just makes it a little harder for me to find as I read these things. All right, so if we were in class doing this, the discussion question would be this one from the textbook. Did you ever wish to borrow something? Write the note that you would leave behind if you took an item without asking. And for whatever that's worth, when you live in a family and you have a refrigerator at home and there's certain food in there and you get hungry, sometimes you take the things that are in there. Maybe it was something that somebody else was saving to eat later, and there can be a little awkwardness. Imagine the whole situation that comes out about with this. And in the old days, before everybody had electricity and refrigeration using compressors and Freon and things like that, everybody had what was called an ice box. Looked kind of like a refrigerator, except every so often, a vendor would come down your street. He was the ice man. And he had large blocks of ice that literally would be harvested off of lakes in the wintertime. They would go out on these lakes when the ice was maybe 11 inches thick, cut it into blocks, pack all that ice in straw and sawdust and things, put it underground or in a cave or something like that. And then throughout the summer, they would dig out this ice, which was still frozen, and they would sell it. You'd put it in the top of your ice box. Your food went underneath, and the coolness would kind of come down over your food. The ice would melt. The water would go down around the sides into the bottom. And if you wanted an ice cold drink or something like that, people would even, tap off the melted ice that was in the bottom from time to time. So when we talk about an ice box in this poem, think of antique refrigerator. That'll work. All right, the literary tools for this first poem are going to be speaker and tone, and you know both of these by now. So if we read a short story, you have a narrator. The narrator is the person talking to you, telling you the story. Sometimes the narrator is a character in the story. Sometimes the narrator is not. In a poem, we call that voice talking to you, the reader. We call that voice the speaker. And tone is the emotional attitude towards the reader or or towards the subject in the piece. I think most of the time it's towards the subject in the piece. You have poems that can be very serious, they could be lighthearted, they could be kind of tongue-in-cheek, sort of snarky, joking, and you feel that emotional attitude if a writer's done his or her job, properly. The other one that we have here, these, I would not differentiate these like the textbook does, rhythm and meter. Their definition of rhythm is it's the pattern of beats or stresses. If you think of music, you can hear a tune and you could clap it out. You could take a drum and go on, and that's rhythm. In poetry, we have rhythm, but we call it meter, and there are certain established meters. So metrical feet are little groups of stressed and unstressed syllables, like for instance, dot it, dot it, dot it, dot it, dot it, dot it. You start to hear a rhythm already. And then we give names to those based on how many are in this group and which ones are stressed and which ones are unstressed. You might remember back when you did Romeo and Juliet, or if you did Julius Caesar or The Merchant of Venice in 10th grade, Shakespeare used something called iambic pentameter. Meter is at the end of that. So iambic meaning a strong and a weak syllable put together, 5 of them meaning penta, and every line then had 5 of those groups of weak and then strong syllables. Now here's the poem. You don't have to go to your textbook or anything like that. Let's just read this poem together. This is the first one. This is just to say. So it goes like this. I have eaten the plums that are in, let me start over again. I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. Now that may not even feel like a poem, may feel like a couple of sentences. It's an apology note really, but ice cold plums right out of the icebox, they would be so refreshing, especially if it was summer. And it's just a note. I picture this poem almost being left inside the refrigerator. But look at the imagery, and I don't literally mean the plums that I have on screen here, but look at the imagery for this one. I've eaten them. They were there, they're not there. Right? Imagine opening, you've been saving your plums, you open the refrigerator just waiting to eat those plums, and they're gone. And the speaker in the poem knows very well you were saving them for breakfast, right? And ate them anyway. Asks for an apology and says, they were delicious. Like I couldn't help myself. Or maybe they were delicious, in case you wanted to know, since you didn't get to eat them. They were so sweet and so cold. So we could discuss this poem. I'm not going to try to interpret this poem and tell you this is what the poem means, but just from these, go back to that idea once again of there are no ideas except in things. Just from these few words in this poem, you can sort of envision all of the intricacies of what's going on between the speaker in the poem and whoever the poem is addressed to. Obviously, it's not you. I know you didn't have plums in the, that would be really weird if you did, and now you go there today and they're gone. But it's addressed to someone who's not you, who's not the reader. The reader is someone who owned these plums. And I'm not sure if this is really an apology, or if it's kind of like, I got the poems and you would have loved them, or I'm trying to make you feel better. I eat your plums, but at least I enjoyed them, kind of thing. It's all in the imagery of what you see here. All right, let's do the check for understanding questions. By the way, the check for understanding questions for poetry in our textbook are really weak. They're so literal and low level because they're multiple choice and true and false. So we'll go through them, but I would much rather hear your thoughts on these poems. All right, some true or falses. The plums were in the icebox. That's a hard question. You can read into this one again. Well, they were at one point. They're not at the point where we're reading the poem. So I would say, yeah, they were in the icebox, and then they weren't in the icebox. But it is true that at some point they were in the icebox. Number 2, the person addressed, again, we talked about this. So the speaker's addressing someone who is not you, even though that you would be the person it was intended for. The person addressed was probably saving the plums for a snack. Stupid question again, is breakfast a snack? I mean, we eat snacks, we eat breakfast. The poem specifically says for breakfast. So I don't know that Oh, a snack, that would be wrong, you know, but that's the correct answer according to the people who wrote this unit. The plums were sweet. They were. They were so sweet and so cold. That's the last line, and there's some imagery in that. The plums were the speakers, belonged to the speakers, and of course not. There'd be no apology note if the speaker had, I'm sorry, I ate my own plums. Was I not supposed to? And number 5, the speaker enjoyed the plums. Yeah, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. That sounds almost creepy when I keep saying that. True. All right. Now, the other poem, oh, we got a few more here. Sorry about that. We have a few here that have to do with our literary terms. What is the implied emotional attitude towards the reader or the subject in a literary work? And of course, that is tone. And then what is the pattern of beats or stresses? These two, again, I would never make you differentiate these two. I don't think they're written well enough to make a difference here, and rhythm and meter are too close. But if I had to do preferred, the pattern of beats would be the rhythm, because that applies to anything, a verse or prose. But if we've got a poem with a known meter, then we have to use meter, right? So I don't think there's enough difference in there that should be two different questions. All right, looking at the second poem, and this one is the one that you could debate for a long time. When you close your eyes, what image do you see? What? Nothing, it's dark. That's what a student in class told me one time. But sometimes when we close our eyes, we see something we're thinking about. Sometimes we close our eyes and we see what we were looking at before we closed our eyes, but somehow it's different. And so I don't actually know why they asked this question here, but let's take a look at the red wheelbarrow. So image and imagery, we talked about that. I'm not even going to go over that again. Speaker, we talked about. And effect. Now, this is something a little, it's the impression that's left at the end of the poem. What impact does the poem have on you, the reader, when it's over? So that would be the effect. All right, here's the poem. So simple. All right, let's take a look at this one here. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rain water beside the white chickens. That's it. It's a sentence again. All right, but look at this. Here's modernism at its best. Number 1, no rhyme. There's a little bit of meter. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rain water beside the white chickens. And you could decide as the reader of the poem, do I pause between depends and upon, between wheel and barrow, because that's the way it's on the page? Or do I just keep going? And that's kind of one of the fun things about poetry is when you read it out loud, you're already starting to do an interpretation. But we have really just a single image here. We have an image of a red wheelbarrow covered in rainwater, glistening perhaps, next to some white chickens. Other than the image, the only thing we have from the poet is those words, so much depends upon this red, wagon here. Now, people have argued and debated and discussed, is there symbolism here? Is this more simple than it looks? Is it, it's probably a farm, right? Most people don't keep, white chickens in their living room. And so assume it's a farm. You might find a wheelbarrow on a farm. And a lot does depend on a red wheelbarrow. You use them for work. You carry things around. Without that wheelbarrow, you may not be able to feed those chickens. You may not be able to do some work that brings your income. You may not be able to feed your family. Ultimately, you might be out of work. How can you be a farmer if you don't have a wheelbarrow? Anyway, I'm being a little ridiculous here. But what the poet does not tell us is what depends upon the red wheelbarrow. It's up to us to decide. So much depends upon this red wheelbarrow. But at no point is that much, kind of described for us. The poet does, and that's on purpose. Certainly he could have done that. He could have given us a shopping list of all the things this wheelbarrow is needed for, but he does not do that, right? And as I said, some people also start debating the colors. The red against the white. Is it just for contrast? Is it just for the way it looks? And then it's not just a red wheelbarrow, but it's a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater. Rainwater. Some people might just say with rain. Some people might just say with water. Does he write glazed with rainwater because he likes the rhythm of that? And is it really red because it has something to do with socialism? Is it the idea that the workers will rise up and do something, to improve their own cause, in the words of Karl Marx or something like that? I don't know. But it's a fun poem to just sit around with some people sometime and talk about what it might really mean. All right, here are some stupid check for understanding questions. The first one, the wheelbarrow is glazed with, rainwater. It's not too hard, huh? And number two, the wheelbarrow is located beside the white chickens. I think these questions are just questions somebody wrote because they're like, I don't know what to really ask about this poem, but I have to prove that you read it, so I'll ask something really simple right from the text. And now here we have some literary terms. So what do we call the character? I don't like the word character, but what do we call the voice who narrates a poem? And we would call that voice, oops, did I not fill that in? I might have made a mistake here. I thought I was going to type my answer in here. We would call that the speaker. So let's do it this way. Let me grab my pen here instead of that. This one isn't set up to put these in the right spot for me. So that would be the speaker. So we're going to see if I can write with this thing. Hey, that's not too bad. So the speaker, not too bad. The speaker narrates the poem. Number two, language that creates a concrete representation of an object or an experience would be an image. And imagery is one of William Carlos Williams' strong points. And number three, the general impression or emotional impact that a literary work achieves. And in this case, we use each one time. So that would be effect. All right. I like it better when I have these set up ahead of time. All right. Some true or falses. The speaker describes the importance of a red wheelbarrow. False. That's up to the reader to decide. So much depends on a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chicken. See, I got it memorized already. It's a sentence. Number two, the wheelbarrow's wet with rain. Well, it's glazed with rainwater, so I suppose it is. And number three, the main focus of this poem is the white chickens. And of course, that's false. It's called the red wheelbarrow, not the white chickens next to the red wheelbarrow. It's all about that wheelbarrow. And maybe the chickens are there just for contrast. Okay, and believe it or not, that's our entire lesson on William Carlos Williams. You may have some questions or some other things to follow up with in Schoology. So if you're working from home, be sure to check Schoology, make sure there are no other assignments today. But you do not need to go to your textbook or to your computer and find those poems. We covered them together. So I'll see you soon.